Welcome to Tech and Drugs. I'm your host, Thibaut. And in this podcast, we explore how data and technology are transforming drug R&D in pharma and biotech. I'm thrilled to kick off our inaugural episode with not one, but two incredible guests from Kiin AI, Filippo Abbondanza and Mark Davis. So Filippo holds a PhD in human genetics from the University of St. Andrews, and he spent 5 years working across academia and the private sector, and the last 5 years as a product director at LiveBeat, developing solutions to streamline genomic analysis. He recently co-founded Kiin AI with a bold vision to build the first end-to-end AI scientist. So we are talking about a system that can learn, design, execute, and troubleshoot complex scientific tasks. A fascinating and frankly wildly ambitious goal, and I can't wait to dive into it. Joining Filippo is Mark Davis, who brings a unique blend of expertise in molecular genetics and computer science. Mark's journey includes significant contribution to the Campbell program at the European Bioinformatics Institute, EBI, and more than 8 years at Benevolent AI, so one of the original pioneers of the tech biospace. Whilst at Benevolent, Mark led data strategy, informatics, and multiple AI initiatives. So he recently joined Kiin AI, adding his wealth of expertise to their mission. Filippo, Mark, welcome to the podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you both here for the first episode. Let's jump right in. To kick off things, can you tell me a little bit more about yourself, your background, what brought you to doing what you're doing today? Filippo, maybe if you want to start.
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot, Thibault, for the podcast, and to very excited to be in the first episode ever of the podcast. So yeah, on my side, my background is purely in biotech, and I've always, since the undergrad and the master, started to see that technology was going to play a bigger and bigger role in bio, and I started to move towards the bioinformatics field first, and then joining LiveBeat as one of the first employees. And the idea there was to be close to a startup early on to understand all the dynamics and how technology can be adapted, basically, for life science. And the past 5 years, I've been in both at LiveBeat and doing my PhD in bioinformatics. And there's always been this problem we try to fix that everyone kept on talking about end-to-end solution, but there was not real end-to-end solution out there. There was not a real technology that could support end-to-end solution. It was just a lot of hard-coded pipeline, a lot of hard-coded buttons in the platform, a lot of hard-coded behavior that would really not scale with how pharma works. And as you guys know, like you can have the same exact problem across two different pharmas, but there are different solutions, different ways things are done, different politics, budget, technology, everything is different. And end of last year, I started to see this interesting technology with Gen AI that can actually help to avoid hard coding behavior and help to actually understand and adapt based on what experiment we do. And end of last year, beginning of this year, I left LiveBeat. The PhD was finalized after a lot of pain, and it was the right time to start what is now Kiin AI, with the idea being to create this virtual scientist that can actually help connecting all the dots in drug discovery programs across the entire value chain. And to sum it up, the idea here, and one big need that is in pharma and in biotech that I've seen, is that do a parallel to the tech world. On a tech world, there is Amazon, that they started selling books. Then they map the entire value chain and start to integrate all the different steps of the value chain and start to own the trucks, transportations, and everything. But there is not in the life science, there's not a framework, a company, a way that you can have all this value chain mapped and actually all the steps integrated. That's me in a nutshell. And I guess, Mark, if you want to add a bit on your side as well.
Yeah, no, first of all, thank you very much for inviting us to the podcast. It's the inaugural one. So yeah, Mark Davis. Going back to the beginning, my interests and backgrounds have always been biology, understanding what goes on in the body, and took this through into understanding, studying genetics, and joined my first company in the early 2000s. And this was really sort of focused on the Human Genome Project, and actually quite hands-on, delving into the information that was being generated, both from the public initiatives and the commercial ones as well. And this for me was a bit of an inflection or a turning point in terms of to actually really derive value from this. I had to basically inject into myself improved computational skills, which I didn't actually have going into this initial kind of sort of career effort. It was much more on the kind of understandings going on. And for me, focusing on computer science, what are the underlying skills? Back in the day, Perl was actually the primary language of choice by most bioinformaticians, and sort of honing my skills in that particular domain, but lots and lots of data coming out of this project, and actually then figuring out how to really sort of derive value. And this also then really kicks off, actually for much of my career going forwards from that, is realizing actually there's a lot of data being generated. There's often a lot of noise and a lot of kind of complications attached to it. How do we actually transform it, harmonize it, turn it into something that's really, really valuable to then support what happens next? And this what happens next is something that I've just sort of been tracking and been very much a part of throughout all of the other sort of activities, roles I've been playing throughout my career. So again, benefiting from learning how you can create value from early stage sequencing projects, this actually fed into kind of other areas as well in terms of some molecular genetics, structural biology, building up large computational chemistry databases, and continuing this pattern of what are these rules, what is the data, how do we make it useful? So moving forward, I worked briefly for 6 years at the European Bioinformatics Institute, and they're responsible for building out one of the founding members of the Chemical resource, which again powers a lot of the large computational chemistry efforts across the industry. And about 8 years ago, joined an organization called Kiin AI, where really sort of focusing on, again, all of these different data modalities and sources. How do we think about harmonizing this into large central knowledge systems, which again support target identification, lead optimization and hit ID, and early stage preclinical, clinical work as well. And again, this what are those key data assets that are absolutely critical? How do we make them useful? And how do we sort of feed that into these downstream decision-making activities, which really, really make a difference to drug discovery programs and on their journey, identifying quite a lot of issues and challenges that I think we still need to develop solutions, technology-based. And this is actually where, earlier this year, reconnecting with Filippo, is that actually there's a lot of opportunity here to start leveraging types of the technologies, whether it's AI, large language models, other slightly even earlier sort of technologies as well, but how these can be sort of deployed in a new setting to actually really think about how we can sort of reshape, understand what is actually potentially happening and how we can build out these products and platforms to support researchers throughout the drug discovery process. That's a plotted history of my background and where we got to today.
Well, thanks, Filippo and Mark. This is a great segue to kickstart the whole podcast series, because one of the original idea of starting this podcast was really to explore the interface between data, tech, and their impact on pharma, specifically on R&D within pharma. So that's really what I want to focus on, and get your take on that. When we prepared this episode, Filippo, I know that one thing that you wanted to talk about was education and tools in pharma. We've talked about the lack of education on AI tools in pharma. Why do you think this gap exists? Can you say something about that?
Yeah, that's a very very interesting topic for me. So there's I think overall there is a lot of noise out there. And the reason being is that there's a lot of incentives for researcher to publish papers and tools, right? And then what happens is that you have thousands of new tools being released every single day, every single month, and just difficult to know what's happening, and it's difficult to educate yourself on what are the right tools. So for example, now actually, I was going to GitHub, and if you look for bioinformatics, there are 9,838 tools and software. And even if 10% of those one are actually useful, we still talk of almost 1,000 different tools out there, right? So there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of noise, a lot of tools, a lot of data, and especially when it comes to AI, because everything is new, right? And from the beginning of the year, we start to track all the latest tools, and we have this database where we found something like 430 different tools across 110 different use cases in life science. And what's really important, what's missing, as you were saying, is that there is not a proper place to learn what is the right tool and when. And even if you do know what's the right tool and when, it's impossible for you to keep up with the latest technology, because you cannot spend all the time looking for paper and reading for the new tools, right? And that's also helped to think the idea of Kiin AI as a way that you have a virtual scientist that knows which are the right tools and why they should be run. But overall, there is a lot of missed opportunities. There's a lot of technology out there. Like as everyone knows, researching to do thousands of activities in their day-to-day in their drug discovery project, And the good news is that there is some technology that can help at each and every of the activities they have to do. Problem is, which are the right tools? How do you find them? How do you use them? But there is something that can help throughout the entire value chain of what a drug discovery program should look like.
So Mark, you worked in in a company using a lot of those tools and developing tools. So can you give us maybe your take on trying to keep up with all the papers, all the new take, and what to choose, and how to educate the rest of your organization, to decide on one thing or the other?
Yeah, it's always been, I guess, a tricky thing to manage. There's always the latest and greatest kind of tool, or whether it be kind of an AlphaFold, which gets a lot of, rightly so, a lot of publicity, is generating some really valuable insights. But how does that sort of feed into kind of existing workflows, sort of capabilities, and it's kind of managing sort of teams' expectations on what you can and can't do with that. And then sitting behind that is many other sort of tools and capabilities, some equivalents, some sort of supporting that type of activity, and then others in completely different domains. And I think one of these sort of common patterns always kind of witnessed is essentially the language or the communication around what these tools can and can't do. And we very often have kind of sessions where either we're kind of utilizing a particular tool or actually developing like a new AI model, which may be sort of supporting generative chemistry, like designing new molecules, or an interaction potentially between a target's a particular role in a disease, trying to uncover that. But how these models or how these tools are actually doing this is often quite tricky to explain. And it goes back to that older description of sort of black box models or things that are hidden away. How are the benchmarks better sort of describing what the process is happening? And we often find the two groups within the organization, one more on the tech side, very focused on pushing those benchmarks, those capabilities, and the biologists and drug discovery teams trying to interpret the results, understand what is most critical. And I think this kind of intercommunication between these groups is often challenging because there's different language, different expectations, and these don't always sort of land, or they've landed one way, but 3 months down the line, there's realized there's maybe a miscommunication or a misunderstanding. It's not quite doing as one was kind of initially expecting, or doing something quite different. And again, it's how you sort of shape those sort of discussions, those expectations. What is a particular benchmarks way of assessing it? What does it really mean in very sort of plain terms? And what does that really mean then in drug discovery terms, or that particular research question you're trying to answer? So just kicking off projects or delving deep into what is being utilized early, and trying to be as very sort of clear as possible what a model, a tool, a capability can do, and making sure the audience, the team knows these limitations, or how it sort of closely aligns to what needs to be achieved. I think that's one of these sort of critical things that you see quite often, and investing time in that upfront is absolutely paramount.
And to add actually on this one, because that's something that also we were discussing in the past. It's everyone now talks about AI tools, right? There's a new LLM, new AI for something, but it doesn't need to be. You don't need all these fancy terms and fancy technology to solve problems, right? So there's also, and we discussed it in the past, that it's an anecdote from a friend of mine in the lab that they were sending some of the samples to a CRO, and the CRO is supposed to send back an Excel with all the sample information. They send a photo, a screenshot of the Excel, right? So there's a lot of simple technology, simple tools that can help solving very important problems. It doesn't have to be everything AI, but it has to be very, as Mark was saying, very well understood of what tool can solve which problem, and be transparent to the users, right? Or to whoever consumes.
It's a great point, because we keep talking about all those fancy things, and then, as you just said, people are stuck in Excel, or even worse, a screenshot of Excel. How do you see things evolving now? What's your take on going from screenshot of Excel to something better?
I think that there's like every industry, there is a lot of technology that will come and play a bigger and bigger role, right? There's of course a very strong cultural difference between the life science industry and the technology industry because of how the programs run. But I really think there's going to be a lot of ways to support scientists to use the right tools. And if you think about it, right, why do you need to send a screenshot of an Excel to someone, right? It may be because it's easier and faster for you. So if you have a tool or something that can help you do your activity faster, you can do it in the best possible way, right? So I think there's going to be a lot of tools that support researcher to focus more on the science and focus less on the activities or sharing the information. And a lot of AI will play a role in there to help communicating what's important to communicate. So removing, supporting scientists and extending scientists basically to move faster. And there's actually a a quote that I read from Daria Modei, the founder of Anthropic. He wrote a seminar online book called I forgot the name of it, but basically it talks about AI and where he sees the AI. And one of the chapters about biology and life science, and the way you see the future of AI is not that AI is a mathematical model to do some prediction for you, but more something that can support you and extend you to do the different activities you do in your day-to-day, right? From reading papers to going to the lab to sending information to a CRO and vice versa, all of these sort of activities. And we think the same one. And personally, I really think this is the case, that AI is going to be a way to support, to extend you to do your activities in the best possible way. So you don't need to spend time into making a spreadsheet and send it to your client, right? The AI can do this stuff for you, or you can focus on the actual science where scientists can, shine the most.
Mark, you spent quite a lot of time both at EBI and Benevolent. So was Excel banned in those places, or did you experience similar things, or how did you deal essentially?
Yeah, so I think we've all got numerous stories of like date conversion issues in Excel, like receiving something and then a year down the line figuring out why the 1st of December is appearing in all these different sort of database columns at a later stage. But yeah, this goes back actually to something that is absolutely critical within the sector, within harmonization of data, these sort of fair data principles, and good semantics, standardization, and we're still at the beginning of this journey in a lot of places, because there is a lot of things that still need to be tidied up, but a lot of good efforts have kicked off over the last 5-10 years, focused on different areas. But this goes back actually to one of the sort of founding principles in AI more generally, is the quality of the data sort of feeding into much of the models, the program, sort of building out, drastically impacts what they can actually do at a later stage. And the more we invest in making sure that there are good standards, whether it's ontologies, whether it's just controlled vocabularies, however you want to think about it, that is absolutely critical. I think not extending actually on Filippo's point as well earlier, around this interplay between I guess the bigger tech, these more ways of thinking about building out systems, products. It's probably had an even bigger impact than say actually the AI developments. It's actually the process attached to how you think about sort of software development, product development, understanding what your users want from an actual sort of system. And I sort of witnessed this certainly over the last 10 years in smaller biotechs as they start to scale up, the way in which you sort of think about building out products, really sort of going deep into what a user is ultimately expecting from a system, and how these ways of engaging ultimately in building out these systems has drastically impacted the way in which you create things, you get results, you maybe fail quickly, but also learn quickly as well in that process. And you're starting to see this emulated in larger organizations as well. And I think that's probably played just just as an important role as actually some of the advances that we're sort of witnessing in AI and sort of similar systems as well at the moment.
You talked about FAIR and the importance of FAIR. So how have you seen that in being implemented in organization? Because my experience with FAIR is that it's more philosophy than a cookbook. So it tells you why it's important and why organizations should adopt FAIR, but it doesn't really give you a step-by-step list of things to do to implement FAIR. And often I found it challenging to explain what it is and how to roll this out in organization. So is there anything you can say about that? What's your experience with implementing?
Yeah, and again, just listeners sort of benefit made up the opposite sort of speed. So verification of data really sort of focuses on the acronym FAIR, so findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability around data itself. And essentially, when we think about an organization, it's determining the right profile of those types of capabilities when you're thinking about your data usage, your data, how it sort of sits within an organization. And fully embracing FAIR is a big, very tall order actually, and I'm ticking all the boxes there, and finding out what is the the suitable sort of depth you want to go into. And in terms of findability is probably the most basic thing there. Within your organization, you want to be able to find all of the data assets that are available. You want to know where they are, so creating things like data dictionaries, those types of resources are kind of critical. And you would have thought fairly kind of sort of basic things that should be in place, but quite often are missing within organizations. So progressing on like a verification adoption for an organization is more like a staged process, and how you then introduce that information across the organization. I think a lot of organizations are at the start of that journey.
Filippo, we talked about bioinformatics and pharma IT being disconnected. So it's bioinformatics is an area that you explore deeply. And what are some of the biggest hurdles that you see in the field?
Yeah, I think it goes back to also what Mark was saying about FAIR. And just to continue on that side, my experience with LiveBit working with companies trying to do FAIR, and we were also providing data services to companies, is that there's not a recipe, there's not a cookie cutter to replicate every time how to do it. On top of it, you have a lot of very different stakeholders, right? There's a lot of different budget holders, there's a lot of complexities in how departments are set up, which can create some hurdles. And that's the same issue that we saw in bioinformatics, where you have quite a disconnect from whoever is in charge of the IT side. It is the one mostly, looking at the infrastructure, looking at the how the infrastructure of the company works. Then you have the bioinformaticians that they're supposed to build all the tools, maybe for the biologist. Then there's a strong disconnect because of how departments are set up, from my experience, which then leads to the fact that either bioinformaticians don't create the right tools for the biologists in the team, or they create them, but they're not as usable as they should be. And I think another big problem or big opportunity, talk about problem, talk about opportunities, a big opportunity in all this field is improving the UX. Because you can have the best tools out there, the best software, the best bioinformatics you build, but if you don't have an easy way or a good way to operate them, then it doesn't really matter, right? And what we see many times is that when bioinformaticians were creating the right tools for the biologists or chemists in the lab, because they didn't think much about users, the result was that the biologists were always asking bioinformaticians to actually run the tools on their behalf. And then you create a lot of friction between teams, and there's different priorities, and you create friction that is not really needed if you think about UX, right? Again, you can have the best technology in the world, but if it's not usable or you don't know how to use it, it's pointless. So again, the experience in here was that the IT war and bioinformaticians, they were sort of disconnected with the biologists. And even when the pipeline were properly created, biologists were very, very often relying on giving the work back to the bioinformatician to actually run the analysis, troubleshoot them, and send back the final report or interpretations. And I think that's something that is quite, it happens quite a lot. And I think a good solution for this one is to really focus on users and focus on UX, and taking all the tech learning for the past 30 years and start to apply them more heavily on the pharma world.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about that just in a moment. What pharma can learn from IT and like IT product development. But I'd love to get Mark's takes on that because my impression, or at least what I'm thinking about, is that the company tech bios like Benevolent, at least it's my impression, they were kind of started almost like software companies. So are they, in your experience, doing a better job at connecting those different worlds, like the biology world and the IT world, and ensuring that it's more seamless?
Yeah, so I think that was kind of a founding principle, certainly when the organization was set up. And And actually going back to an earlier point around sort of product development, the idea of strong cross-functional teams where you have sort of software engineering, AI researchers, informatics, product management, all working alongside each other. But the key element as well is then making sure we additionally have like the drug discovery, the people that properly understand the capability, the tool, the service that's being built. Again, it's part of that team. And one of the things we did evaluate quite a different way, numerous ways of running sort of product management from different schools, from Spotify kind of setups, IBM ones, all the way through to our own kind of internally, picking the best ways of doing things, because research is hard and the timelines are different to everything else kind of attached in life sciences, and managing how we sort of figure out if we are building a new model, what is then going back, what is that right benchmark, and clinical benchmarks. These are often so far away from anything that you can sort of test now or evaluate now, and almost having kind of these sort of lag indicators to indicate when something may be occurring sooner. What are those proxies, and figuring that out. But again, working with the team to evaluate that piece. So going into the how we sort of focused on sort of product, I think this was something that we did sort of pioneer very early within an organization, and we have sort of seen this being a cornerstone for many other of these tech bios setting up around the same time as Benevolent. And then we've sort of seen with our sort of partnerships with large pharma being then adopted, that sort of product mindset, cross-functional teams, working closely with the actual kind of user, actually building out the tool for them on that side. So it is something that we did sort of focus on very, very early, and I believe we did benefit enormously from those close exchanges.
That's a very interesting point, because one of the things that we see now is a lot of the tech bios are announcing that they can go from early discovery all the way to the first clinical phases in 18 months. So 18 months seems to be the new normal for tech bios, and when you compare that to large pharma, where it's typically 5-6 years. So you just touched on that. How do you see what is happening now in the tech bios world being adopted in large pharma, and how can large pharma maybe reinvent themselves to be able to be more more nimble and more like a software company in many ways?
So I think the easy answer to that is actually more collaboration actually between sort of pharma and smaller organizations that are sort of pioneering these approaches, and whether it's as sort of simple as thinking of like off-the-shelf capabilities from those tech bios that are slotting into the preclinical activities of large pharma. That's certainly something that we're witnessing a lot of. I also think that as a consequence of that, pharma will then also additionally looking to bring those organizations into their own areas through acquisitions as well on that side. But I think that those closer links, whether it's through collaboration or acquisition, will be probably that sort of thing that really sort of does drive the time improvements we'll be seeing over the next 5 to 10 years within the sector. And it's much needed as well, actually, because we can see lots of opportunities to improve things, and we are beginning to witness the investments made 5 years ago, how they are translating to improved early stage preclinical development timelines.
So fast forward to today, so Kiin AI. So let's talk about the new company and the vision of Kiin AI for the future. So Filippo, can you tell us about your current work at Kiin AI? What are the problems you're solving? How?
Yeah, so the idea for Kiin AI, came up last year while, or this year while, after leaving life, finished the PhD, I took a few months to think of what's next. And there's a lot of opportunities of AI in the field. And the idea really is quite simple. Researching to do thousands of activities, as I was saying before, from papers to finding data, designing experiments in the lab, running them, doing some prediction. There's a lot of different activities. And the good news is that there is technology and innovation that can help each of those activities, being AI, LLM, being a simple website with some information, whatever it is, a technology. The bad news is that there is not a framework, there's not something that connects all the activities, so that you as a user, you have a simple way to understand what's happening, and a simple way to get an assistant helping you throughout the journey. And what we are doing with Kiin AI basically is to create what we call virtual scientist. And the idea of virtual scientist is that is a virtual scientist that extends your skill set in different areas of life science that is integrated with all the trusted tools in the field and understand how to use them based on your input, based on your scientific problem. So the idea here is that you go to a platform, you say, I want to repurpose a drug for cancer, and the platform understands all the different activities you should do. It creates a plan for you. Each plan is his own task and his own tool, his own software, his own database to look at. And then the virtual scientist runs all the experiment for you and then give you the answer. And the idea here really is to fast track and increase productivity in all the different activities you do in a way that you can focus as a user most of your time on the science, and the virtual scientist can assist you and do all the rest of the activities, basically. And we are creating different virtual scientists, so we want to basically emulate the skill set of the different personas in drug discovery, from a research scientist to bioinformatician, cheminformatician, lab technician, and so on. So that you have a way to, again, connect all the different activities across the entire value chain of drug discovery. And and we have the first virtual scientists already in place that are starting to solve some real problems for some users. But I think the key focus in here is that you need to have something that can integrate, that can create plans and try to solve your problem based on the best tools out there in a way that it always keeps innovating and always keeps using the latest technology that is actually working well for specific use cases. And this is something that it's a very complex problem to solve, of course, because if you need to connect a lot of tools and get an AI to understand how to use them and why, it's a very complex. But the plus side of this one, and again thinking much more in the future, is that if you think about it, AlphaFold, CRISPR, all the huge breakthroughs in life science, they came from the same 15, 20, 30 different labs, right? But we have 10, 15 million researchers out there, something like that. And the idea here is to equip each and every one of those researchers to support them and to give them more time to the actual science to accelerate all the breakthroughs out there. So the short term is to improve productivity with the idea overall to actually get time back to focus on science and get more breakthroughs.
One thing that I find really interesting is that one of the pain points that you're solving is kind of taking away this pain from scientists to find the tool, to know what is the right tool. How do you keep up with all those tools? Because I'm every day on LinkedIn and I'm spending a lot of time on archive to read all the different stuff, and it's incredibly difficult to keep up with the pace of new tools being released. So maybe it's your secret sauce, but is there anything you can say about that, keeping up with all those super fast development?
Yes. So as I was saying, the key is to have the best tools that are trusted by the research, right? If you always integrate the new tool that is being released today or yesterday, there's a lot of time focused on understanding what are the best tools that are reliable enough by researchers in the community. So there's a lot of time spent in there. And both me and Mark spend a lot of time actually reviewing the tools. We have this database of all the latest tools out there, the latest and greatest across the different use cases. But there's a really strong focus in that. And also, as part of Kiin AI, we're also releasing a weekly newsletter where we talk about the latest tools, the 3-4 latest tools we are seeing that are very interesting or powerful in the field. And that's not the classical AlphaFold review. It's more the little gems. They can add a lot of value that people are not aware, basically. One of them is Chemcro, that has been sort of been talked a lot in the past for doing chemistry, generative chemistry. So we spend a lot of time building newsletter and reviewing, but also we are setting up a community edition of the platform. We want to give to all the researchers out there to make sure that we always get feedback of what's the best thing to do, right? And this goes to the point that talk about UX again. Everything we do it for people, right? So people, overall, researchers, users, they need to be involved in the process and not just receiving an end product, right? They should be part of shaping what the future look like, because you cannot You cannot hire an army of hundreds of bioinformaticians, informaticians. It has to be something done with the community, for the community.
This one almost a philosophical question. So we've talked a lot about data and AI. So if you had to summarize, what's your view on like the role that AI is playing today in transforming drug R&D, specifically the early phases?
I think maybe there was certainly a turning point. Obviously the GPT kind of landing a couple of years back, and how that was sort of directly impacting, not just in life sciences, but across all sectors more generally. It's like, this is there was a before and after sort of event, and how people can see that impacting on their day-to-day work on that side. And I think lots of sectors actually then took a step back and sort of had those kind of moments of actually what does the future really mean? What sort of roles will be affected? And I think the reality is we've kind of realized actually this is a very, very powerful tool to work alongside kind of users on a day-to-day basis. These language models, how they can really sort of support understandings, summarization, through to actually generative kind of capabilities alongside some of these language model capabilities. And I think now we're sort of starting to connect the dots in actually what is potentially possible when we start thinking about the infrastructure, the engineering that can actually sort of power some of these sorts of technologies and capabilities. And I think this is something certainly with the work at sort of Kiin, we're very much sort of thinking about, so how can we build sort of tools, platforms to work alongside users to really sort of support their existing sort of capabilities, augment their existing kind of workflows, fill in the gaps where these hundreds of tools which are being sort of released on almost a weekly basis. What are the right ones to be utilizing, and what is the platform to actually then deliver that to them? So I think maybe these earlier concerns about how AI, language models, these big sort of foundational pieces will be sort of directly impacting on roles, I think it's kind of dissipated a little bit. And now we're starting to think about how we can really maximize their usage, how they can really sort of augment support and really sort of deliver these sort of step games or step changes that we really want to see within the sector. And again, what are those kind of right models we need to be building, focusing, and the infrastructure to support it as well. So I think, the original sort of concern has lifted slightly, and we're actually really starting to benefit massively from the impacts from the AI.
And just to add on that one, very quickly, but there's been a lot of focus in the field to create more biological data, more clinical data, more domain expert data, let's go this way, to improve specific models that predict the protein sequence, that can predict some, single cell clustering, that can predict different things, right? And that's great, and it has helped a lot of companies. For example, all these tech bio were mentioning that they can go to the first, lead candidate in clinical trials in 18 months. It's because you can use AI across different activities you would do, right? But the problem we really see, that I think is the future, is that if it takes 18 months because the models, the vertical models out there, but you need to know how to use them and when and so on, is one thing. But if on top of that, you have something that can connect the different pieces together, then it's a whole new level of productivity. And again, my point in here is that we don't need necessarily to reinvent the wheel. There is a lot of technology today that can be used better without having to reinvent how LLM work and make new architecture, new transformations. But there's a lot of things out there that can be used today. It's just a matter of connecting them in the right way. And then you will go down, as opposed to 5 years to 18 months, you go down from 18 months to, goodness what, 6 months, 8 months, right? Just because it's not just the models that are very good in what they do in the vertical use case, but it's more how you connect and how you integrate, because at the end of the day, you still have people in different teams that you talk to each others and support each others, and all of this interaction can be simplified with some AI assistant that can connect the different pieces.
Now, broader industry question. With all the big tech entering life sciences and pharma, we see announcement almost every day, from Amazon, Google, Microsoft. So do you think that traditional pharma will remain relevant in the future?
So from my side, it's an interesting question. I'm quite bullish for the tech world. And what I think is that a lot of tech companies will have a stronger effect on the field. And I think that all the preclinical will be strongly accelerated by tech companies. And apart from technology, part of the reason is because of the way companies set up, the culture, the mentality, the way departments are structured. If I'm saying that because on the tech field, everything is structured to be very, very fast, and the feedback loop and everything moves much faster, as opposed to the pharma field, where historically it takes many years to get results, right? So the way the company structure is also different. So I really think that tech companies are going to have a much bigger impact in everything because of the mentality, the structure, as well as the speed at adopting the right technology. And I think we're going to see many more of these agreements, as you're saying, from NVIDIA, from AWS, from all of these companies.
I completely agree with that. And we often, again, I've witnessed as well, these sort of frustrations, actually pace at which more classical tech moves is so much faster than sort of drug discovery and biotech pharma sort of world. And that creates frustrations because you want to build something, release it, get results very quickly and improve it or move on to something else on that sort of front. But whereas in life sciences, drug discovery, you're dependent on assays, biological systems running. Sometimes these can take months, if not years, to get set up and actually getting the results that validate what was ever kind of created in the first place. And as a consequence, the timelines, the people involved change, move at different rates. But I do agree this, we're going to sort of see, I think, across the full drug discovery cycle and from early stage preclinical creeping into the clinical, gradual improvements and the way in which we can sort of speed things up. Things around actually getting assays set up, we'll have to sort of figure out potentially ways to improve that piece. And lab automation is something that is sort of growing more and more, and something that at Kiin we're looking at as well on that particular front and how that can be sort of supported within the platform. But in terms of how tech and drug discovery does sort of operate, there's definitely improvements on that side, and I think the longer term opportunity will ultimately be in that sort of clinical space. And I think that's where most time is spent, most money is spent, most people are kind of involved in. And again, I think there's lots and lots of opportunities there for kind of AI technology, as well to have an enormous effect to disrupt that entire part of the process.
Next question is for you then. Do you think that life scientists need to learn AI, need to learn coding to stay competitive? I mean, you have a hybrid background, so maybe your response will be a bit biased, but what do you think?
Yeah, so I think certainly maybe, tracking my own sort of trajectory, going back 15, 20 years, and I sort of definitely sort of said yes on that sort of side, but that was maybe my sort of narrow Lincoln view on things. I think, the reality is, I don't think that is the case anymore very much. I think there's systems and tooling that can sort of support, augment, and really kind of empower researchers from any background to have at their fingertips the latest and greatest tooling, AI, data, whatever it may be. And we're seeing improved systems to enable that already now. So I think, I don't think that's a requirement, and I think there are multiple ways in which researchers across life sciences will be supported.
What are your thoughts on AI being better at quote unquote understanding biology than humans?
So I think, of course, it's a complex topic. One of the things I'm hearing a lot, at least linked to this one, is that AI is going to replace biologists, researchers, and so on because it understands things in science better than them. And I don't think it's the case. I think AI is a tool, it's a technology, like internet back then, right? Or any technology for that matters. So it's more something that can help the person to better understand and better take decisions. So it's not something that replaces you because of better understanding how things are. It's more a tool that if you know how to use, it can improve your productivity massively. And there's a lot of course, if you have petabyte of data, there's no way you as a person can understand all the relationship, right? But the point is, you don't have to. You need to know which is the tool that can do it for you, right? So of course, I can be better at something, but in the end, it's just a tool that people need to learn how to use it. If you know how to use it properly, it can improve your day-to-day massively. And it's not I don't think AI is going to replace people, especially in this field, because if you think about it, we have We have drugs for about 10% of the possible disease. So there's still a lot of space, a lot of opportunities to innovate, right? But it's more a tool that if it's used properly, you can deliver value to patients faster, which is why all of us are in here.
We keep going back to AI being a tool and selecting the right tool among many, many potential tools. So which brings me to the next question. And I think you mentioned that when we started the discussion, user experience and adoption of tools in pharma. So you've mentioned that UX is often overlooked in pharma when developing a digital solution. And just, as a side note, I fully agree with you. I mean, I worked with pharma, I've developed tools myself, and I've seen that very often that since we are developing tools for scientists, sometimes people think, oh, scientists are so smart that I don't need to make it easy for them. And what I always answer is like, well, they are normal people. They also like to have tools where you don't necessarily need a user manual. What's your take on that? User experience in pharma. Both Mark and Filippo, I guess you will have a perspective.
Historically, UX has not been a strong component of tooling within sort of drug discovery and life sciences. There's been a lot of obviously fantastic tooling created, but actually the user experience, I don't think has always been that great. When we sort of think about what needs to be part of these multi-modality systems to support all of the types of questions that researchers are wanting to answer and asking this, again, sort of genome browsers and viewers, how they've evolved over the years, alongside the sort of structural biology components, and then generative chemistry, these vast data sets of information. Yeah, it is, information data heavy, data rich. And I think getting lessons learned from, I guess, these large techs on how to manage and view that is something that we're seeing more and more examples of, than these sort of close partnerships. So I think it is a lot more work to be done. It's something we're taking sort of very seriously as we're building out the platform at Kiin AI as well on that side. And again, I look forward to talking more about that at a later stage.
Just to add on the UX, as Mark was saying, there's been a lot of progress in the industry, but there is not the right incentives. Because of course, it's like any other industry. There is someone who is the decision maker, right? Someone who holds a budget, and UX needs to be a priority. And the problem is that it's difficult to give value to the UX, right? Because it's difficult to have an ROI of how much a better UX is going to improve the utilization of a tool, or which leads to better drugs. The thing is that it's quite complex, but if you don't focus a lot on the UX, as you were saying, Thibault, people assume the researchers are smart, which they are, but doesn't mean they want to spend hours understanding all the nitty-gritty on how to use Pymol, which is very powerful, but very complex, right? And if you think about a computer, it's similar in the same way that a computer, you can have a nice desktop with all the apps, all these things, but whenever you want, you can also deep dive into how the actual software work, right? You can open a task manager and see how things happen. So I think the sweet spot is to understand how to have a UX that can support having a very simple view of what's happening, but allow the user to get to deep dive as much as possible into the details. So how do you have something that can support the multiple layers, right? And I think a lot of it has to do also with education of how much emphasis, how much budget, how much support is put on the UX, because UX means time to do it properly. And it's always, if you need to cut time, for what I've seen, is always the first place where you want to cut, although you shouldn't, because in the long run, it's going to pay off the most.
It's interesting that you're using Pymol as an example. That actually, when I started my PhD, we were on Silicon Graphics, and then we moved to Pymol. And for me, it was a game changer because it was so much easier to use than the Silicon Graphics. So yeah, it kind of reminded me of good old time. So looking ahead, and maybe to conclude the discussion, it's the end of the year, so we all like to make prediction, which are not always right, on what's coming up in the next 5-10 years. So what do you see as the biggest opportunity?
There's going to be a lot of solutions trying to connect tools to real world problem. And again, everyone now is talking about AI, and everyone has his own AI assistant, which are basically some wrapper of ChatGPT, which is not the solution. But I think there's going to be a lot of AI entering the physical world, entering the lab, entering how you interact with the lab, how you interact with papers, and so on. So I think the biggest breakthrough are going to come from connecting the right tools. And I think in the next 5-10 years, there are going to be quite a few solutions And hopefully Kiin is going to be one of those one that can actually help you fast track your day-to-day. There's going to be a lot of specific AI models out there. They're going to be the new version of AlphaFold. There's a lot of, as Mark was saying, a lot of opportunities on the clinical side. There's a lot of untapped potential on how to use AI on the clinical side. But everything clinical requires compliance. There's all the legal framework behind, so it's going to be more complex. But I think the future of AI is the big opportunity in the next 10 years is to create this sort of virtual scientists that can help researchers to do stuff, activities in the day-to-day, including connecting to physical labs, not just in silico, but actually connect the AI with the real world.
What's the focus now is, I guess, very much on sort of verticals within the different sectors, and you think of that as being the earlier sort of stage target ID, then sort of hit ID, lead optimization, different pooling data capabilities required to carry out those tasks. And I see and within the industry, the walls sort of breaking down between the different verticals, how you essentially can run much longer activities within there, but also across those different sectors, and really sort of supporting that longer term earlier stage discovery, and eventually sort of leading into sort of earlier stage parts of the clinical side. And that itself will sort of hopefully sort of translate into those faster timelines, reduce costs as well, that everyone is wanting to see and the industry needs as well. So I think that'll be what we'll witness over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. And again, as Filippo was saying, this connection with lab automation, really getting results very, very quickly within these systems as well, will be another component we're going to be witnessing much more of as well.
Any concluding thoughts now? So imagine you're someone in charge of developing AI solution or rolling out AI solution in a pharma company. Any advice you would give to someone in a position like that?
I think one of the most overlooked problems is not the technology. It's easy, quote unquote easy, to create some model, to deploy some AI. The problem is change management. How do you handle change management in a way that you want to minimize it, of course, because otherwise you get stuck in the process. So I think really focusing on change management is important. And one way to address change management can also be the UX, right? Because if you make it simple for someone to transition, it's much more likely the transition is going to be successful. And going back to the UX, but I think all the change management is quite overlooked. I think it's quite well known. All these sort of RAG systems, they are very much, one of the main problem is change management, but I think is overall overlooked in how to digitalize all these, or put more AI in the pharma.
Mark?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and the topic from earlier, I guess there's lots of advances already happening, obviously in AI, we're sort of feeling the benefits there, but in parallel, it's the process attached to implementing and bringing it into organizations is having just a drastic impact, when it comes either to the product itself or the development of the products. And so whether it's change management, whether it's getting champions within particular teams to really kind of understand and be the representative of whether it is an AI solution or a new capability. I think that's the key thing for the leaders within these organizations to be identifying, and then having those individuals working across the barriers of different departments, functions, and have that sort of communication, because we see a lot of silos still, and how these can be sort of broken down. So planning for change, wanting to come along, I think is something the organizations definitely need to embrace.
And just to jump a second more on what Mark, you were saying, change management is one area, but as you were saying, Mark, is also re-understanding, apart from the user you're deploying the solution to, but the department, because you need to know how the department works and where the solution fits in that department and how it fits in other departments, right? Because there's a lot of layers you need to make sure you understand to properly deploy a successful solution to users.
Well, and that will conclude our episode. So Mark and Filippo, thanks a lot. I had a lot of fun. I hope you had too, and I'd love to continue the discussion at some point. When you get more more experience and more client with Kiin AI, and I wish you a lot of success with your new project.
thanks, and thanks a lot for getting us in here. It's been a very, very nice experience, and yeah, hopefully we're gonna do another episode with more details on how we are rolling out AI in actual clients.
Perfect.
Yeah, no, thank you. Look forward to returning soon.